Let's go to that.
What Parshah are you on?
Parshah Shelach.
Shelach.
Yes. Let me just make sure I've closed down.
It's Shana or something like that, but the or something like that.
That's right.
Remember.
You're not forgotten a thing.
I did A-levels in Tanakh, and I got 100. Wow. And Tanakh.
Good.
In Tanakh, I got
Don't stop learning.
We have a weekly in the evening, 3 times a week. We do Yishayahu.
What? Wow.
We did
Parshah B'Tsav.
We did all of them. In Yishayahu.
Fantastic. Proper learning. Okay. Tonight's class is a little bit longer or more in depth than our regular classes because it's a fantastic sikha that was chosen for us. However, we're not going to shy away from a complicated topic. And if we get sidetracked without getting to the end, that'll also be fine. Because as we just said, learning Torah is nothing like it. Every step of the way is going to be special. Let's start off with saying, first of all, a major Yashar Koach and Shelach to Michal Leah Cohen for sponsoring the content of tonight's class, the chaymer that was prepared. Thank you very much to Yishu Ben Shtem and the family. Lots of bracha and atzach and mazel and good news. We're now going to go into our 3-step program. Our 3-step program starts off with what's going on in the calendar. And from there we go on to what's going on in the Parsha. And straight from there we get into one practical, relevant life message that we can hopefully put into practice right away. And it should help us and benefit us in a way of how we serve our Eibishter with that through our life. Switched on. Switched on means that we're not switched off. Switched on means that we find the connection between us and our Eibishter in every part of our life, literally. Wherever we are, wherever it is that we are, whatever it is that we're doing. So, what's going on in this week in the calendar? I'm trying to remember all the things that are going on this week's calendar. We are in Chodesh Sivan, but this Shabbos will be Shabbos Mevarchim. Shabbos Mevarchim means, time flies by when you're having fun. Yes, it was Pesach just the week before. Like Boimos in between. Sorry, 1 second. We have here that we have Shabbos Mevarchim Chodesh Tammuz, which also happens to be that Chodesh Tammuz has in it some very unique days on the Jewish calendar and on the Hasidic calendar. And specifically, we have Shabbos Mevorachim Chodesh Tammuz brings us the koyach to be able to navigate through all the ups and downs that these dates bring us, and it brings us a reminder and a realization. It happens to be also that right after Shabbos, we'll be celebrating Chof Chesivan, which we'll talk about more next week, which is the day that the Rebbe and his wife, Rebbe Tzin Chaim Mushka, made it to safety from the Holocaust from Europe, which in itself was tremendous and miraculous. And they never turned their back once. They continued to help, and even before they left, they also gave up tickets and all sorts of enormous help in order to help others. But of course, the mission that is ours today isn't just to remember the past, isn't just to live with memories, but our mission is to take those memories and make them meaningful futures. So I'm going to ask you to close the door. That's okay, just because it's straight to the street, probably ideal. At least almost all the way. Thank you. That was helpful. So we're going to say that we have a mission of taking the past, and the reason we look into the past is in order to have power, energy, encouragement, inspiration for the future. And of course, a date like Chof Chesivan gives us exactly that, not so much just about how we're mourning or talking about the loss of the past, but also to think about how it can help us in the future. We're going to do, besides to talking about Shabbos Mevorchim in general, which gives us the koyach, because it gives us the bracha, which is why it's called Shabbos Mevorchim. And it's on that Shabbos that we give a bracha for the upcoming month. And this month in particular, which is Chodesh Tammuz, it has in it Shiva Asar Tammuz, it has in it Yud Beis Tammuz, it has in it Gimel Tammuz, some tremendous highlights in the calendar, which we'll get to one by one. The bracha for the entire upcoming month is from the Shabbos Mevorchim. Of course, it's also a very important week. in the reading of the Parshah of Parshah Shelach. We are still involved heavily in our recording of the first 12, 13 months from when the Jewish people left Mitzrayim, Egypt. When we left Mitzrayim, we had a very, very busy year. The whole year had all sorts of good things and things that were not so good. For starters, the Kriyas Yam Tov and coming through the miracles was tremendous. And then, of course, Matan Torah, receiving Hashem's Torah 49 days after leaving Mitzrayim was also tremendous. The golden calf wasn't so tremendous, but it happened, part of our history. And then, of course, we had from there all sorts of the Karban Pesach, the building of the Mishkan. There was lots going on. Here we're talking about after that story, where the Yiddish people are now ready to move straight into Eretz Yisrael. The dust is settled, with time to go in. And Moshe Rabbeinu is moving the people towards the direction of Yisrael, and all of a sudden we turn around to Moshe. We say, Moshe, how do we know it's a good place to go to? How do we know it's going to be worth our while to go into Eretz Yisrael? Maybe not. Convince us. As Rashi says, Moshe Rabbeinu makes a quick cheshbon because he says, if I tell them no, I'm not going to convince you, they're going to be worried that why don't I want to get engaged? Why I'm not ready to show them how good it is. And therefore, it'd be better for me to show confidence and say, actually, yes, oh, no problem. I'm happy to check it out. And then hopefully they'll at least get this together, the sense and say, you know what, it's fine. We see how confident you are, it's okay. But the Yiddish people didn't let up. Moshe says, fine, we can go and check it out. We sent some spies in. They said, yes, please. So Moshe Rabbeinu asks Hashem, is it okay to send spies? And Hashem tells Moshe in this week's Parshah, the opening words, Shelach lecha anoshim, send for yourself spies. And of course, Shelach anoshim, send spies, would be a direct command. There's only one little tiny two-lettered word that Hashem throws in there, which changes our understanding of the entire story of the Meraglim of the spy story. Everyone loves a spy story. But the basis of this original, the very original spy story in history was that it was Shelach lecha. And as Rashi says, lecha l'daitcha. Send spies because that's what you want and that's what you understand. No problem. I allow you to do it. And of course, you know, the story goes out that Moshe Rabbeinu chose one spy for each tribe. And they go out and spend 40 days traveling the length and breadth of Eretz Yisrael. And they go and check the whole place out. And they come back carrying huge, enormously gorgeous looking fruit.
My foot, it wasn't egged.
There was no egged. And there was no halal either. Correct, there was no halal. And even the shipping company hadn't been invented back then. But when they came back, as the story goes, 10 out of the 12 spies had a bad report to make. They said, yes, it's true. Look at this fantastic land. However, Ephes, Kiazam, it's giant, the warriors, there's no way we can do it. And there's only 2 out of 12, Kalev and Yeshua. Then it says, what are you talking about? Of course we can conquer it. But what did the masses understand? What did they buy into? People started crying and complaining and saying, there's no way we can do this. We might as well go back to Egypt, to Mitzrayim. We don't want to. And Hashem says, you know what? If this is what you want, this is what you have. You don't want to go into Eretz Yisrael? You won't. You're worried about the safety of your children? Well, stay out here in the desert. We're not going to engage the enemy. However, you shall know that the children you worry about, they will go in. In 1 second, the meshugas, and how you say that in English, the craze that they came into the head, the stupidity that came into the head about how we're going to be able to conquer Eretz Yisrael, Eretz Canaan. Who conquered Parah? Who brought them out of Mitzrayim? Who brought them through the Yam Tov? Who didn't mean that we're going to get through that? All of a sudden, the clarity just came to them. And now the Rebbe writes in Tanya, what changed? What changed between the moment where the Yiddish people said, no way, we're never going to make it, till minutes later, they all of a sudden turn around and said, actually, no, we changed our mind. We're sure we want to go in. And as we're about to learn, Hashem says to him, no, don't go. And they said, no, we're going to go, we're ready to go. And Moshe says, no, but now Hashem's not protecting you. You have plenty to be afraid of. The only reason we're not afraid is because Hashem protects us. And if Hashem says no, then don't go. But what changed? And the answer is, of course, that what changed was that Moshe Rabbeinu said to them, if you don't want to go, you won't go. The rebuke, the straight clarity and openness that Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to them and told them off just shook up the entire Meshugas that they had. But by that time it was too late, and unfortunately, now the Yiddish people, some of them at least, made a mistake the other way around, and they tried to storm the mountain, and unfortunately, they were caught and rooted out, and it was a terrible ending for those people. And this was eventually going to become a Thomas Vicious. Okay, so that's the end of the story of the spy story. You would imagine this would be a great place to end the Parshah, but no, the Parshah right away goes on to continue the halachas of menachos, of the meal offering, the flour offering, the wine, the oil, and the offering of the offerings, as well as giving us the famous mitzvah, the mitzvah Shelach. Says Rashi, why now all of a sudden these mitzvahs fit in as a continuation for the spies and these are people's unfortunate mistake that cost them not going to Israel? And of course, the answer is in Rashi, no one should make a mistake that when they messed up so badly, it was over. It was far from over. This became the right time for Hashem to tell the people, don't worry, you're not going to Eretz Yisrael, but it's not over. You will, as a people, make it into Eretz Yisrael, and in Eretz Yisrael, you'll have special mitzvahs which I will teach to you now, because it's not over. And although we make a mistake, when we do make a mistake, we brush off, get up, and get back right into the ring to continue doing what we have to do. It's a mitzvah of challah that will only apply in Eretz Yisrael. We'll tell it now. The end of the Parsha, there's two more stories, or two more things. One is the story of the Mekoshish Eitzim, the one who was gathering with sticks and broke Shabbos, was put to death with Skila. And the end of the Parsha ends off with the mitzvah of tzitzis, which we actually have in our Sidurim as part of the daily recitation of Shema. Why do we say the Parsha of tzitzis every day? Why do we mention the halachas of tzitzis? Because it's a mitzvah to wear tzitzis every day, and we should be wearing it. But also, more importantly, as we learn in the Mishnah, it's a part of the end of that parsha, which reminds us of leaving Mitzrayim. Famously, the Mishnah says that we say it even at nighttime because of the mitzvah to remember Yitzis Mitzrayim even at night. This parsha, which although it's in Parshas Shelach Lecha, which is the way before the parsha of Eschanon and Ekev, so in the order of how the Torah teaches us the three parshas of Shema, it should be the first, but instead we put it as the third because in the order of importance, this is after we've already accepted Hashem as our King, and we've accepted in Parshas Vahoya the obligation of mitzvahs. We then, after that, also have to remind ourselves that we have tzitzis that remind us of the 613 mitzvahs, and we also have the obligation to remember Shema. And that's what's going on in the Parsha. Now, if I ask you, which part of the Parsha do you think is worth elaborating or in exploring to find a relevant message? Whichever part of the Parsha you choose is right. Because the Parsha is loaded. Each area of this Parsha, the mistake that they made, the answer that they answered, the punishment that we received, the story afterwards where we try to insist against Hashem's will, and of course, the mitzvahs, each mitzvah, and certainly the story of the Mekoshish Eitzim has levels upon levels that we can expound, and the Parsha of Vayomer has certainly got levels. So there's loads to explore in this Parsha. We're going to choose one area. Before we do that, I just want to share an interesting thought I heard for the first time this year. I don't know where it comes from. An interesting thought about the mistake the Meraglim made. The Meraglim, the spies, were going in to settle a land, a place to call home. A place where we were, oh wow. Yeah, a place that we were going to call home. And the Parsha tells us that these same Jewish people who were less than a year before stood at Har Sinai and said, Na'aseh v'nishma. All of a sudden now Hashem wants to tell them what to do. And they're saying, no, we can't go by Hashem. We have to decide ourselves. We've got to send our own spies. And then we're not happy enough. So one of the ways of explaining, I'm not sure where this comes from, but one of the ways to explain their mistake, it's a great, powerful lesson, regardless of where the source is, was that they were, unfortunately, there's sometimes, or I can even say oftentimes, a divide between our personal life, mundane, material life, and our spiritual Yiddishkeit life. So when I'm in shul, when I'm learning Torah, you're here tonight learning Torah, when I'm doing a mitzvah, I'm very focused on what Hashem wants, and I bear in mind the desire of why I was created. This is the mission. But what does it look like when I'm out at work? What does it look like when I'm spending time with people who maybe don't necessarily often do mitzvahs? We don't have that mindset. Maybe they're non-Jewish friends, acquaintances. So there was the famous saying about the fellow who would say, when I'm on vacation, I pray that I don't bump into my rabbi. And equally, when I'm in shul, I pray that my colleagues don't walk in and see what I look like there. Why? Because it's like so different. My life, it's like such a different hat that I'm wearing. And Chassidus will tell us that maybe perhaps the most important thing I can do in my life is find a way to bridge that gap, to streamline that when I'm at work and I'm at home and I'm at whatever I'm doing, my dining room, whatever else I am, there's nothing wrong or different or contradictory to what I do when I'm in shul. And equally, what I'm doing in shul does not contradict in any shape or form what I'm doing anywhere else. And I'm perfectly comfortable being a proud Yid everywhere else, and I have nothing to be ashamed of or embarrassed of what I'm doing when I come to shul. And that sort of bridge is perhaps one of the ways of explaining what the Meraglim were missing. The Yiddish guy, the connection to Hashem, lofty spirituality, no problem. You want to go and make a homeland, you want to settle down, be able to say where I'm going to invest, where I'm going to do, that's my area. I can't have Hashem mixed into that. And there was a major problem. That divide began the slippery slope of starting to see myself as a separate entity to Hashem, chas v'shalom. And of course, Hashem will take care of his domain, but I'll take care of my domain, chas v'shalom. In other words, that I cannot invite Hashem into my private life. That's not okay. And the result was a very slippery slope, which unfortunately costed us 40 years. But for those people who were there, cost them their future, their ability to go into Eretz Yisrael. Until the time that Moshe Rabbeinu will lead them in, when the time comes. Okay, so that's one little short idea that warms us up. We're now going to move on to another idea in this week's Sedra, and that is the idea that we're going to learn and explore. You matter, and then an emphasis, yes, even you. Hashem doesn't only pay attention to big things and important people, but even small people. There was an exercise that we were encouraged to do in the class, and that is to think of yourself about what are the most important things that you do altogether. Like, think about what things are really important, things that you do that are extremely valuable. Don't answer out loud if you don't want to. And then when you have that in mind and you think of something which is what you would consider very important to yourself and to the things that you do, ask yourself the question, how many people are affected by what you do or don't do? Whatever that thing is, how many people are actually going to know the difference if you did it or didn't do it? If you lived up to it or you did not live up to it? Generally speaking, I mean, as a parent, it might be the family. As a family person, it might be, as a communal person, it might be the community. By and large, for most people, the answer to that question does not include more than 1,000 people. Certainly not more than 10,000 people. In the scheme of 7 billion human beings that walk the planet Earth, unless you are the president of America or the prime minister, Boris Johnson, whatever you are, generally speaking, most people are not going to be directly affected if I live up to my mission or don't. If I live up to my biggest value. And then the question becomes, do I really matter in the larger scheme of things? How relevant, how important am I? How many people care about what I do or don't do? Not just what they do care, but should they even care about what I do or don't do? And of course, the answer is going to be, and we're going to borrow a lot of Baal Shem Tov, a lot of Hasidic teachings. And of course, the answer is going to be, as the Rebbe will teach us in the Sikha, it makes no difference how many people care. it does make a difference whether Hashem cares about what I do. Do I matter to Hashem? Now, it's a serious question. 7 billion human beings. And the answer is going to be, if Hashem cares, then you matter. Because however many people care is irrelevant compared to whether Hashem cares. And Hashem is telling us, in this week's Parshah, we're going to make a tremendous emphasis on this. And it's interesting how the Sikh is going to segue into this, but we're going to be exploring how important we are, not based on how many kudos we'll get from people, likes and followers, or whatever you're using, whatever social media platform you use. It's not about that. It's about whether the Ribono Shel Olam is noticing what we're doing. And what we're about to explore tonight, B'ezras Hashem, is to find just how much Hashem cares and is interested in us. And not just us in the plural, us in the individual, each one of us. It's just fascinating to learn it, even though it might not be so much new information, but to explore it again and to remind ourselves how much Hashem is watching, cares, and how much we matter to the large scheme of things. Before we get started, if anyone wants to say or suggest, comment, or question, now's a good time to ask. We're going to, if anyone wants something specific to say, that's fine. Otherwise, I'm going to go into the continuation of this text. I'm going to try and zoom in here so we can see what it is. But this is the story of what happens when the Meraglim come back and they give their nasty report. And 10 of them are bad-mouthing and turning the Yidden away. And you have a desperate attempt. The two good Meraglim, Yeshua and Kalev, are trying to turn the tide. So here we have the Pasuk telling us, Yeshua ben Nun, Yeshua the son of Nun, and Kalev ben Yefuneh, who amongst those who had scouted the land tore their clothes. They spoke to the entire congregation on the Egyptians saying, the land we passed through to scout is an exceedingly good land. And more importantly, if God desires us, he will bring us to this land and give it to us, a land flowing with milk and honey. But you shall not rebel against God. And you will not fear the people of that land, for they are as our bread. Notice, and you will not. If you don't rebel against Hashem, then you have nothing to be afraid of. Ki lachmeinu hem, they are like our bread. And then he throws in the words, Kisar tzilam me'alem, their protection is removed from them. Hashem is with us, do not fear them. So here you have it. Let's just do this. Don't be afraid, because Hashem desires us. And then they, the non-Jewish people, the non-Jewish inhabitants of the land, are not protected. Sar tzilam me'alem, their shade has been removed from them. So Rashi, we're going to focus for a second, and we're going to look at, let me see, you see my cursor, we don't, okay. We'll try, whatever, it's fine, we'll make it. Oh, it works. Sar tzilam me'aleim, non-Jews are not protected is what we're going to focus on now for a second. Because, as Rashi is going to point out, that's an interesting statement to make. To say that Hashem likes us, that's fine. To say that they are not protected, we're obviously pointing to something. We're describing something, and we want to focus on that. What's going to be amazing is that this little statement that Yehoshua makes, that these non-Jewish inhabitants of the land are no longer protected, is going to become an opening for a fascinating conversation. If we do it properly, will give us great insight to how much Hashem is protecting and desires us, compared to, in contrast to, the non-protection of the non-Jewish inhabitants of that land at the time. Let's start off with Rashi. Sar tzilam me'alem. Dr. Rashi, Sar tzilam, their protection is removed from them. Maginam v'chazkam, their shield and strength. Says Rashi explains, Ksherim shabahem mesu. Their righteous and pious ones, which are amongst them, which are their shield and their strength, are no longer alive, have passed away. Who are those? Eoiv. Shoyamagin aleim. Eoiv is actually one of the Sifrei Tanakh, Book of Job, Sefer Eoiv. And according to this quote in Rashi, Eov lived in the times of the Yiddish people leaving Mitzrayim. Eov would have been one of those advisors who would have advised Pharaoh, and then left Mitzrayim when he saw that they were not taking his advice. Where did he live? In Eretz Canaan. And his righteousness was so great, it would have been perhaps some level of protection for the non-Jewish inhabitants against the Israelites, Bnei Yisrael. But Yeshua now spreads the news to the people, hoping that this might turn them around and says, what are you worried about? They have no merits left because even Eov is no longer alive. His merits won't protect them. This is explanation A. Says Rashi Dava Acher, another interpretation. Siloi shel hamakim sar mehaleim. Not the shade of the people. The shade of Hashem has departed from them. What's the shade of Hashem that has departed from them? So God's shade refers to, and we're going to learn here an interesting idea from the Baal Shem Tov. But before that, the basic understanding is that if you are under the protection, under the wing of Hashem, you are under his shade, and he's looking after you. And Yeshua is telling the people that the shade has been removed from them, Hashem no longer is protecting them. The Baal Shem Tov is going to say, actually, this is, by the way, just warming up to where we want to go. Yeah, we're just delving into a little bit of what the Pasuk, the story of Yeshua's words, where he's trying to rally the crowd. Unfortunately, it doesn't work because we don't buy into it. But what he's telling us is that the nations of Canaan have lost their shade. Which shade? The shade of Hashem. Says the Baal Shem Tov, fascinating. Pasuk in Tehillim tells us, Hashem Shomrecha, Hashem Tzilcha, Ayad Minecha. God is your guardian. God is your shadow. He is by your right hand. The shadow in Hebrew is the word tzilcha. Your shadow is the shade that you create. Your shade is your shadow. We're careful using the word here because I'm using the word shade in English, not in Hebrew, yeah? But the word shade here in English means your shadow that I create. So my shadow is the shade that I make. Hashem tzilcha, Hashem is your shadow. Says the Baal Shem Tov, fascinating. We're going to read it in the words of Rabbi Yitzchak Baditchev, and the Baditchev writes what he learned from the Baal Shem Tov. Says the Baditchev, the Baal Shem Tov said the following explanation for the words Hashem is your shadow. You know the explanation?
What?
You know the explanation of the Baal Shem Tov? Hashem conducts himself with humans as a shadow. Just as whatever a person does is mimicked by their shadow. So if I move my hand, the shadow moves its hand. If I sit down, the shadow sits down. If I jump up, the shadow will jump up. Hashem does the same thing with us. Hashem acts as if he is our shadow. Says the Baal Shem Tov, or the Baditchev tells us, Hashem mimics what a person does, treating them as they behave. If I am kind, Hashem is kind. If I am happy, then Hashem will reciprocate with joy. This is the words of the explanation for Hashem's shadow, is that a person's actions trigger a reaction on high that mimics our actions. Just fascinating to think about it. How can I create a good energy coming from Hashem to me? What can I do to create good energy? What's the answer? Says the Baal Shem Tov, the answer is jump in. Jump in. Start acting joyfully, and Hashem will reciprocate because Hashem tzilcha. Hashem's shadow vis-a-vis non-Jews means thus, Hashem doesn't withhold reward from any creature, and as such, their actions also trigger a reaction from on high. Something is bestowed upon them. In other words, when they do a good deed, they are given reward. And when they commit a violation, a reaction from on high is meted out that mimics their actions. If it was a violation, then the reaction is likewise destructive, i.e. a punishment. So when something good is done, the reaction that Hashem decides to reward good behavior isn't just tit for tat. You did something, I'll get you back. You did something good, I'll reward you. Says Baal Shem Tov, it's a shadow. It's the consequence. It's the creation of the behavior that causes that action. So when a person has tzaras, we turn around to Hashem, we say to Hashem, Ribono Shel Olam, you've given me tzaras, but I will refuse to become sad. However, that's possible. And instead, I'm going to insist on being upbeat. Insist. Hashem mimics that behavior. And Hashem says, you know what? You're insisting on being besimcha, even though you have every reason to be not besimcha. I might have reason, says Hashem, to not be besimcha back because of my track record, this, that, the other. But I'm going to shadow your play. And Hashem rewards it. Says the Baal Shem Tov, and the Rebbe brings down a sichel, the same is true with every human being. If a human being behaves in a good way, that will elicit, that will cause reward. And if a human being behaves in a non-good way, that creates punishment. That creates a not good reaction. And this brings us to our question. This is how we understand tzeil. If tzeil means that Hashem shadows us, now let's try and understand again what the pasuk says. Yeshua tells the people their shadow has been removed. And Rashi explains that the shadow of him means the protection of Hashem, Hashem's shadow. What does that mean? Hashem no longer is going to mimic. Hashem is no longer going to shadow those people. In other words, their behavior will be overlooked by Hashem. Is that what Yeshua is telling the people? How is that going to encourage them? But more importantly, how does that actually work? Well, why would Hashem leave them? Does Hashem ever ignore the world? Does Hashem ever check out and say, I've had enough of this, Moshe guys. I can't bear these human beings anymore. I'm leaving. You got to help yourself, be on your own. So on a purely balabatisha level, on a technical level, one could say, Hashem's entitled to do whatever he wants. He's the creator. He could check out. But on a Hasidic level, there's no way Hashem could check out because the world will stop existing. So long as the world is in existence, there's no other way to understand it other than Hashem is fully invested. So what does it mean that Hashem checks out? Oftentimes, the rabbi's question will be, the people ask the rabbi, how could Hashem allow this to happen? And if the rabbi is being honest, you've got to say that actually Hashem didn't allow it to happen. Hashem doesn't allow things to happen. Nothing happens unless Hashem makes it happen. Because there's nothing else. There is no other power. Hashem echad. Doesn't just mean there's no one else in the sky competing gods. Chas v'shalom. Hashem echad means there's nothing else but Hashem. All of creation isn't outside of Hashem. So Hashem didn't let it happen. Hashem makes things happen. And of course, the answer is that Hashem makes it happen. Of course, Hashem knows what he's doing. Back to our question here. How did Hashem remove his tzeil? If, as we've explained, tzeil, shadow, means that Hashem reciprocates. His involvement is in a way that we do it. What does it mean that Hashem removed his shadow from these people? What is Yeshua telling us? So in order to get a good answer, we're going to do a little bit of an exploration of the idea of hashgacha pratis. How do we say hashgacha pratis in English?
Divine providence.
Divine providence. How do we say it in English? Same words. Divine means godly. Okay, divine. Providence means, give me an English word for the providence. Hey, it means something in English. No, all right, someone help me out. How do you say providence? What's another word for providence? A divine providence. I'm trying to translate hashgacha pratis into regular working English. Anyone? Supervision. Oh, I like that word. Hashem's active involvement, supervising, directing, divine providence. Everything is directed, is supervised by Hashem. We're going with that. Thank you. Okay, running along with that word, says the Rambam, and this is actually not from the Sefer Hayad HaChazaka. This is from the Moreh Nevuchim. So, as the Rambam writes himself, it's not necessarily halachic, but it's one way of explaining, or let's say one way of understanding the relationship between creator and creation. One way of understanding Boira Nivra relationship. And here in the Rambam, in the Moreh Nevuchim, he writes that Hashgacha Pratis, divine providence, supervision for Prati. What does Prati mean?
Private.
Specific. Yeah, Prati is private, but specific supervision, where Hashem is involved in each individual creation specifically, says the Rambam, is purely for human beings. Now, you've got to see this inside just to appreciate it. We're going to do it quickly, briefly, just, what's the word? In the lower of the portion of the universe, divine providence does not extend to the individual members of a species, except in the case of mankind. So if you're talking about a herd of elephants, and 4 elephants caught foot and mouth or whatever, some sort of disease, and there's 1,000 elephants in the herd, they're in the jungle. So do the first 2-3 elephants ask, how do we get this sickness? Maybe. The rest of the elephants don't ask, how do we get sick? It's very simple. You got sick because you were hanging out with unhealthy animals, and it's contagious. But if there were human beings, and 1,000 human beings, and 2 people got not well, and a 3rd and a 4th person got not well, even if 1,000 people got not, each individual will ask, why did Hashem let me get ill? Of course, the scientists will say, well, you caught the bacteria. But the believer will say, it's clearly, directly from the hands of Hashem. It's Hashgacha Elyona. There's divine orchestration here, divine input that made this happen, and there's a lesson for me to learn. Why? Because in the individual level, there will be Hashgacha Elyona. However, on the general level, there isn't. Says the Rambam, why would there be Hashgacha Pratis, divine providence, only on humanity, on human beings, not so on the general species? And the Rambam says, I'll tell you very logically, the human being has seichel, the ability to think, to plan, to do much more than any other animal. And therefore, Hashem is fully invested to make sure that the decisions we're making are in tune, are in line with his master plan. And in not only that, not only technically, but also because we are so special, Hashem is keeping an eye on us. If you think about as a mashal, perhaps you might have a mashal of somebody who is a director of a movie. And you're writing the movie. And you have your main actor. Let's say the main actor is a singer. And they, in the movie, come onto the stage and they're going to perform and going to do all songs. And part of the scene is also 1,000 people sitting in an auditorium, in a whatever. And they all have to be there. And you have to hire 1,000 people who are going to sit there. And they all have to be present. So let's just compare how much attention the director of the movie is going to put onto the appearance, the pitch, the performance of your main actor. You're going to know exactly what makeup's on, what what they're wearing, what their confidence looks like, their emotions, what their voice is. Every single piece of every detail of that main actor is in the forefront. But for the 1,000 people who are there, you're going to make sure they're present. You also want to make sure they didn't show up in the pajamas. But do you care if they're smiling or not smiling? A little bit. Do you care if they're holding a pen or they're not holding a pencil? Do you care if they're wearing a red shirt or a blue shirt? As long as it fits in generally, it's okay. Says the Rambam, the stage is set. There's billions of different species of animals, of birds, of insects, and they all set the stage of vegetation, of trees, of grasses. They're all there. And as long as they're present, they've shown up, that's what counts. Hashem is not fully engaged with each level. Compare that to the human being, which is the main actors. Hashem wants to make sure that this is what it's all about. The act is there. So this is how the Rambam explains Hashgacha Pratis on his explanation of the Moreh Nevuchim. One way of explaining it. Now, it happens to be the Rambam in his Sefer Hayad right here tells us, I want you not to make this mistake and think that anything exists without Hashem's input, because this is not to suggest that animals don't need to have godliness in order to exist. Hashem certainly has to know about them and make them happen, not just allow them to be, because otherwise they wouldn't come to being, but without attention. How much attention does Hashem pay to them? How much providence, to borrow an English word, does Hashem give to the animal species? Let's read this inside from the Sefer Hayat. All existence, aside from the Creator, from the first form, which today might be quarks or whatever, like the most basic part of particles of creation, from the kayam be'ish, we like the sun and the moon and the stars, down to a small mosquito in the depths of the earth. It says the Rambam came into being from the influence of his truth. Since he knows himself and recognizes his greatness, beauty, and the truth, he knows everything and nothing is hidden from him. So you cannot even say that there's a mosquito that Hashem is unaware of. The director knows every single person that was hired is hired specifically. And that's just a human director. Hashem is the director of all of heaven and earth. He knows every single being. He created every single being. Here the Rambam writes in the Guide to Perplex as well, understand thoroughly my theory does not describe God to ignorance of anything or any kind of weakness, so don't make that mistake. What we have here is the mainstream understanding of Hashgacha Pratis, certainly if you rewound 400 years ago. 400 years ago, this is how the average mainstream Yiddishkeit explanation, understanding of Hashgacha Pratis was that there is a specific awareness, not even going to use the word awareness, attention given to every single human being individually. And that's true of human beings. Compare that to non-humans. Animals, for example, don't have an attention given to them, but there's an awareness certainly of that. Hashem knows that they are, but each individual animal goes about and does what it is. Which fish is going to be swallowed alive today? Some. Which one? Whatever. Which animal is going to find a good catch today? Some animals are going to find good catch and some won't. Which birds are going to end up hurt and which are not? Whatever. But on the human level, individual attention is paid to each occurrence, to every single person. So now if we talk about consequences, on the human level, actions have consequences. Hashem is fully paying attention to what we do, and therefore he reciprocates in kind. Hashem shadows our action. Compare that to what an animal does or doesn't do. An animal does not get rewarded for their behavior. Says Hashgacha Pratis, why not? Because there is an individual attention being paid to what they do or don't do. That's how we understood up until the Baal Shem Tov's times. And then, here's the Rebbe of Alma, by the way. He writes, as much as God knowledge and embrace everything, he actually texts this in the Sefer. Comes along the Baal Shem Tov. And the Baal Shem Tov says to us that on one level, that's correct. There is a tremendous difference between the Hashgacha that the Eibishter puts onto human beings compared to animals. There is more attention paid to humans. However, when we say that Hashem has awareness of every single part in creation, it doesn't just mean that there are many human beings or many particles, and Hashem is aware of which ones have been invited into the movie, the performance on stage. Because that assumes that they exist before they've been invited in. Of course, says the Baal Shem Tov, nothing exists unless Hashem invites them in. So by being here, it means that Hashem is actually not just being aware of them, Hashem has brought them into creation. And therefore, perhaps a better analogy will be, as you see on the screen, a better analogy is the dots of paint, the different shades of color that are on a beautiful painting. And if you zoom in, you don't necessarily appreciate what that dot is doing. But if you zoom out and you see the larger picture, every single spot of paint that this Mona Lisa or whatever, this painter has put onto the painting is there because not only the painter is aware that it's there, but the painter put it there intentionally. And it didn't get there by itself. And this is how is a better way of understanding what each, even animal, insect, blade of grass is. And the Baal Shem Tov went on further to say that actually, not only is it there on purpose, what happens to it is also on purpose because it's dynamic. Says, one second, I was going to read this quote, it's the quote before. Got it here. The Pinchas Karatzer, Talmud of Baal Shem Tov, writes in the name of the Baal Shem Tov, a person must believe that even a blade of grass lies on the ground by dint of God who decreed it to lie there. I heard in the name of the Baal Shem Tov. I believe in this very language as follows. Divine providence is concerned with which direction the blade of grass will lie. You get a headache just thinking about the details. How many blades of grass are there in your garden? Yeah, then these do. How many blades of grass are there in you and your neighbor's garden together? Then do the block, the street, the 5 streets that you walk every day, the entire area that you live in. Every single blade of grass is in its particular place, in its particular direction, intentionally. It's like just to compute that information is mind-blowing. But if we go back to this, nothing ended up on the painting board unless it was placed there. And placed there means something out of nothing. It's been created a particular way. That's how Hashem designed it. And right now it's being recreated again. And recreated again. Constant creation. Certainly it's there in the way it has to be. Says the Friedrich Rebbe, not only is it there intentionally, it's there purposefully. Hashem needs it to be that way round and not the other way round, because that way round is relevant to the entire mission. It's relevant to the entire being. One of the beautiful mashalim that the previous Rebbe uses to describe this is the difference between the king ruling over his kingdom and the mother running her house. Akeres Abayis. You know what? Let's go with the mashal. Sometimes you start feeling pressured. Oh, you give out. Am I really the mother that Friedrich Rebbe is describing? The answer is yes. Not on a literal level, at least on a metaphorical level. Says the Friedrich Rebbe, there's a difference between how the king runs the kingdom. The king knows of all the subjects. He has files of all the names, and he knows that so-and-so in this city is running this city and it's going smoothly, and the people in this city are a bit rowdy, and he knows generally what's going on. But the Akeres Abayis doesn't just know which items are in her house. She knows why it got there, how it ended up there, what she might use it for. And even if it's not in use now, she knows what it could be used for. And she wants to make sure she knows which ones she wants to get more of and which ones to get less of. She's in tune with how the house is running. Much more than a king is in tune with his kingdom. What's the difference? The closeness, the connection that the king feels for his subjects is very distant. Whereas the closeness a mother might have for her family, for her household, for her home, is very connected, very involved. And what we're learning here is that Hashem isn't just the king of the world, Melech ha'olam, he is. But it's much more than that. Boirei olam umanhigoi. Hashem is the creator and director, supervisor, conductor of the entire world. When we have this understanding, we have an entirely new understanding of how Hashem's world runs, the Hashgacha Al-Yona in the entire world that is Hashem's home. Ad Kan, up until here, we've spent 15 minutes describing the greatness of the Baal Shem Tov's teaching what Hashgacha Aliyona is. We first explored what the mainstream understanding of Hashgacha Pratis was, that there's actors on a stage, and the main actors get specific attention. And as human beings, we have specific attention. We've now extended that and said, actually, specific attention means more attention than regular non-attention. And non-attention, says the Baal Shem Tov, means that Hashem is not only aware of what's there, Hashem is bringing it into being its very way, every moment of the day, constant creation, fully engaged, conducting each and every area. And of course, the Hashgacha Pratis of the human is that plus. Extra attention is paid to the behavior of the human being. We now have a general understanding. We've actually, you know what the word is, simplified. We've made it simplistic. But it's fair to say that we have a good summary of what the two types of Hashgacha Pratis is. We could stop now and do comments and questions, but I would like to just borrow the stage we've just set to go back to our original question, which is now so much stronger. If this is what it means, that Hashem shadows our behavior, because nothing can exist unless Hashem makes it happen. And Hashem is intimately involved in what we do and don't do, like a mother knows what's going on in her home. And every area of our life is very important to Hashem as human beings. Now the question becomes even stronger. How can Hashem check out of that? How can Yeshua say that the shadow is no longer present for the people of Canaan? What does he mean by that? What are we to understand in Yeshua's comment? This is what we want to look at. And when we learn the answer to this question, we better understand what Yeshua is saying. We'll understand that better by better appreciating what Hashem means, that Hashem is, yes, interested in us. When we do that inside here, text 11. You know what? Let's go to text 12. Here's the question. According to Rashi's explanation, the non-Jews are under Hashem's shade, which is consistent with the Rambam's position that they are part of the divine providence. That said, it's clear that this divine providence is entirely unlike the divine providence of the Jewish nation. So, there is, even within the human beings, there's a difference between not so much the attention, because the attention is equal to all human beings that are intelligent, but the providence, the hashgacha that we've just described as a mother looking after and paying attention is levels, and the Yiddish people have a higher intense level. Let's understand this a little bit more. And the way we're going to understand this is, I'm trying to find which text I thought we were going to read. Text 13. Where's text 13? The next one. Here we go. No, I need this. It's going to take me off. Sorry. Okay. Here we go. Zoom in. The Hashgacha Pratis. The divine providence of the Jewish people is not out of utility. And this is where we start getting zoomed in a little bit more. We have to understand, why was it so important for us to say that Hashem knows what's going on, is paying attention to what's going on, is intimately involved in conducting what's going on. So from the regular calculation of how we understand creator and creation, usually we understand it to mean the only way Hashem can have a world that's operating is if he makes it work. And if Hashem were to stop making it work, it would stop being. So Hashem's involved just because that's the only way it could be. The only way it could be a creation is if Hashem is creating it. We're going to call that out of utility. In order to make it utilitarian, in order to make it workable, Hashem is involved. And that's true on the divine providence levels of the animals, the divine providence of humans, in the Rambam's explanation. However, the Baal Shem Tov is going to teach us that there's another reason why Hashem is involved in the divine providence of a Yid. I'm going to leave the text for a second and talk about this outside the text, and then we'll go back in. Think about it in these words. When the mother who runs her house understands, knows, and is in control of everything that's taking place in her home and her household, it's not just because it wouldn't get into the house without her giving it the okay. It's not just because she does the purchasing and the buying when she goes shopping every week. And if she doesn't buy tissues, there'll be no tissues in the house. Or if she doesn't buy grapes, there'll be no grapes. It's much more than that. The reason why the Akeres of bias brings these things home is because she wants them. She chose them. She brought them in. And we're going to say that this is what Hashem is doing for every single Yiddish person. Not just because it's the only way it could work. Hashem is choosing us. Let's see it inside. Back to the text. Divine providence of the Jewish people is not out of utility. Rather, it is simply because Hashem chose us from all the other nations. Hashem desires and loves us with love that transcends all reason or logic. Hashem chooses the very being of every Yid. Fascinating, it goes on to say it's not only the neshama, it goes into this is the guf of a Yid, the mundane personal side of the Jewish person. And as such, Hashem's providence over the Jewish people is a one-sided providence. Say it again, one-sided providence that is not contingent upon the spiritual states of the Jewish people. Hashem's providence never sways, regardless of a Jew's situation. Just unbelievable to read such words. This is what the Baal Shem Tov is teaching us. The divine providence, the Ashkach Al Yonah, the involvement, the care, the attention, the importance that we play in Hashem's mind, so to speak, in Hashem's reality, not just because there's no other way we would be able to do what we do. It's much more than that. It's because we are important to Hashem. We are Hashem's treasure. And it goes further. We're not Hashem's treasure. Hashem doesn't treasure us because we've been so well behaved. And we make Hashem feel so good. It's the other way around. The reason why we are so important, the reason why our choices matter so much is because we're treasured. Because Hashem chose us. Because Hashem feels so close to us, that's why we have to behave. That's why we have to be on our best behavior. Because whatever we do is so important to Hashem, because Hashem already chose us. This one-sided and essential connection between Hashem and the Jewish people is not limited to the overall nation. Rather, it is with every individual Yid. Each one of us is considered Banim Latem Lashem Agechem, Hashem's child. The bond between a parent and a child is absolute, and it doesn't flow from the rational explanation. Rather, simply that the child is the very flesh of the parent. Thus, even if the child rebels against their parents, the bond is not severed, for something is so absolute and tied to the essence, never simply expires. So it is with every individual Jew. They are the child of their Father in heaven. So now you want to go back to Yeshua saying that the flowers have died. The pot no longer has the shade of Hashem. Those who live in Canaan no longer have Hashem's shade. What does that mean? Yeshua and Kalev are explaining to the Yidden that Hashem's unique extra attention was no longer upon the inhabitants of Canaan. Now they were to enjoy it instead. Once we are the chosen people, says Yeshua, there's no longer equal shade here and there. The shade, meaning the absolute extra, bonus, additional, invested attention that Hashem is not only, certainly not just allowing things to happen, making things happen, that's utilitarian for everybody the same. But the shade of Hashem that's on us, The closeness Hashem feels with what happens to us on the ups and downs is incomparable. There's nothing like it. The shade that they have, there's no wellness shade there. The shade is here. The investment that Hashem has on here is on here. What does that tell us practically? Hashem's divine providence. Hashem's providence in such a manner that every tiny detail is under direct scrutiny of the divine. What's more, every detail contributes to the completion of the overall purpose of creation. But there's even more. Insofar as realizing that Hashem truly wishes, the tiniest, most trivial detail is equally consequential to Hashem as the biggest and most important matters. So if I woke up today and had the slightest bit of discomfort and hardship, it matters to Hashem. If I push myself the tiniest amount and I try to say, you know what? I have a reason to be sad. I have a reason to be worried. These are the classic horrors of today's generation. I have a reason to feel a little bit depressed. But I'm going to try. Who knows? The who doesn't matter. Says Hashem, this is where I place my shadow. And everyone else, every other nation doesn't have this. But as a Yiddish person, the slightest effort, movement, bending, push that I try might not be noticed by thousands or tens of thousands of people, but that's not important. What is important is that the Rebbeinu Shalom does notice and does care and is interested and is involved and is Hashgacha Prati. Everything enjoys equal providence. So if someone asks the question, who cares? What's the answer? Hashem cares. Hashem is invested. And therefore there is nothing to fear because Hashem cares about every detail of our life. And it's true that we don't understand everything. And it's true that there are things that if we were to use this as the barometer, as the statistic measure, as the example, we would walk away with a very warped understanding of the world. But in this week's Parshah, we learn, Yeshua tells us, please realize, Sartzila me'alehem, the tail is here. This is where Hashem cares. Hashem is truly on our side. Hashem should give us the koyach, the clarity, the ability to continue riding the high road to Mashiach Tzidkenu, knowing that every step that we take right now is together hand in hand with a brilliant, real Hashgacha Al-Yona in Pratis. Thank you very much for joining. I hope we've learned something. It's powerful. It's in this week's Parashah, one area. It gives us so much koyach. Shabbos Mevorachim this week. We should find brachas in our personal life, in our communal life, in our family life. Most importantly, we should see the goodness. Once again, a big shout out to Michal and Cohen. Thank you very much for joining. Do apologize, we've gone 3 minutes over. Your time is important. I look forward to seeing you same time, same place next week. Be'ez Hashem. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much.
Questions, comments, and suggestions before we go? 5.